8 chairs at a table built for laughter. 1 plate, 1 man. 20 years of snow falling on a house that forgot how to be a home. Silas Crane carved the turkey himself. Same as every year. Same knife his father used. Handle worn smooth by 3 generations of hands that knew how to build things meant to last. The dining room could seat 12. He'd built it that way, back when building big meant believing big. Crystal glasses caught the firelight. China plates from St. Louis, bought the year the railroad came through. A feast for a king or a family or anyone at all. He sat at the head. The other 7 chairs held nothing but silence. Outside, the first snow of November drifted past windows that reflected only him. Inside, the fire crackled and popped, filling the room with warmth that couldn't reach the cold place in his chest. His hand moved to his coat pocket. Fingers found the shape there. Small, familiar, worn smooth by 20 years of touching. He didn't pull it out, never did anymore. Just needed to know it was still there. The candles on the table guttered in some draft he couldn't feel. He looked at the chair across from him, the one that had never been sat in, not once. Silas Crane blew out the candles. He ate his Thanksgiving dinner in the dark because the light made the empty chairs too real. 7 miles of frozen nothing between a man with everything and children with nothing. Silas Crane hadn't planned on taking that road, but the horse knew the way. Morning broke gray and bitter, the kind of cold that settled into bones and stayed there like an unwelcome guest. Silas rode his buckskin mare down the main road towards Stillwater, breath fogging in the air, telling himself he needed supplies from the general store, telling himself that was the only reason he'd left the house. Heck Falls rode alongside, his old cavalry coat buttoned to the throat, bad legs stiff in the stirrup. 30 years the man had worked for Silas, and he still couldn't keep his opinions to himself. "Heard something in town yesterday?" Heck said, not looking over. "Don't recall asking." "Orphanage is hurtin'. Mission home. Mrs. Shaw's been stretching soup so thin you could read scripture through it." Heck spat into the snow. "Kids didn't have nothing for Thanksgiving. Not a scrap." Silas kept his eyes on the road. "Ain't my concern." "Reckon not." They rode in silence. The Stillwater Mission home sat a quarter mile off the main road, a converted church building with whitewashed walls going gray from neglect. Thin smoke rose from the chimney, too thin for a building that size. For a morning this cold, Silas's mare slowed without him pulling the reins. "Boss?" "I know." He sat there, looking at that pitiful thread of smoke. 23 children in there, he'd heard. 23 kids with no mothers, no fathers, no one to carve them turkey or light candles they'd have to blow out. He thought about his table. 8 chairs, 1 plate. "Hell," he muttered, and turned the mare toward the orphanage. The door opened before he could knock. Margaret Shaw stood in the frame, wrapped in a shawl that had seen better decades, her face the color of old parchment and just as thin. She looked at him the way a woman looks at a bill collector. "Mr. Crane?" Not a question. Everyone in the county knew his face. "Come to see how the other half lives?" "Came to see what you need." "What we need." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "What we need is a miracle, Mr. Crane. What we need is people who stay longer than it takes to ease their conscience. But I'll take what I can get." She stepped aside. He entered. The cold inside was worse than the cold outside. "At least outside, you expected it?" In here, children huddled in clusters, sharing blankets, sharing body heat. A boy no older than 6 pressed against an older girl, both of them watching Silas with eyes too old for their faces. "Kitchen's this way," Margaret said, "if you can call it that." And he followed her through a narrow hall where the wallpaper peeled in long strips, past a room where children sat on the floor because there weren't enough chairs, into a kitchen that smelled of nothing. Empty shelves lined the walls. A single pot sat on the stove, steam rising from something thin and gray. "Potato water," Margaret said. "With some salt. That's breakfast, that's lunch, that's supper too, if we're honest about it." Silas didn't speak. Couldn't. 23 children, Mr. Crane. Youngest is 4, oldest is 14. Half of them have coughs that won't quit. The other half will have them by Christmas. She turned to face him. "So what do we need? Everything." "What will we get? Whatever crumbs fall from rich men's tables?" "I ain't here to give crumbs." "Then what are you here for?" Before he could answer, a voice came from behind him. "You got sad eyes, mister." He turned. A girl stood in the doorway. Small, thin, hair the color of rust, dress patched so many times it was more patch than dress. She looked at him the way no one had looked at him in 20 years, straight through, like his money and his land and his name didn't amount to a pile of beans. "Ruth Anne," Margaret said, warning in her voice. "Don't bother Mr. Crane." "I ain't bothering him. I'm just saying." The girl, Ruth Anne, tilted her head. "You got sad eyes. Like you lost something and can't remember where you put it." Silas felt the words hit him somewhere below the ribs. His hand went to his pocket without thinking. Ruth Anne, go help with the young ones. Yes, ma'am. But the girl didn't move. She kept looking at Silas. You gonna help us, mister? Or are you just gonna look around and leave like the others? Ruth Anne, I'm going. She turned, finally, and walked back down the hall. But she looked over her shoulder once. I hope you stay. We ain't had no one stay in a long time. Then she was gone. Silas stood there, hand still in his pocket, fingers wrapped around the small wooden shape he'd carried for 2 decades. Margaret watched him. She's got a way of seeing things, that one. Lost her mother at 5. Never knew her father. Still believes the best in people. She paused. I keep waiting for the world to beat it out of her. Hasn't happened yet. How old is she? 9. 10 in February, if we're still here by then. Silas pulled his hand from his pocket. Empty. I'll be back tomorrow, with a wagon, full wagon. Margaret's expression didn't change. People say a lot of things, Mr. Crane. I ain't people. He walked out without looking back. Couldn't look back. If he did, he might see that girl again, and those eyes that saw too much, and he wasn't ready for that. Might never be ready. Heck was waiting by the horses, stamping his feet against the cold. He took one look at Silas's face and nodded. Got to you, didn't she? Just a kid. Kids see what we hide. That's why we don't like 'em much. Heck handed him the reins. So what's the play, boss? Silas mounted up, looked back at the orphanage one more time. In the window, a small shape watched him, red hair catching what little light there was. We're gonna fill a wagon, he said. Flour, salt pork, apples, whatever we got in the storehouse that ain't nailed down. That's a lot of charity for a man who ain't concerned. Shut up, Heck. Yes, sir. But the old foreman was smiling as they rode away. Behind them, Ruth Anne pressed her hand to the cold glass and watched the 2 men disappear into the gray morning. Her breath fogged the window. She drew a small heart in the condensation before it faded. He's coming back, she said to no one. I can tell. A wagon full of flour, salt pork, and apples rolled into Stillwater Mission like a prayer someone forgot to ask for. The children didn't cheer. They were too hungry to believe it was real. The wagon creaked under the weight of more food than the orphanage had seen in 6 months. Silas drove it himself. Heck riding alongside with 2 ranch hands bringing a second cart loaded with firewood and blankets. The sky hung low and white, threatening snow that wouldn't come till nightfall. Margaret Shaw stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching them approach like she was waiting for the trick. The children gathered behind her in the doorway, silent, breath clouding in the cold air. Silas pulled the wagon to a stop. Mornin', Mrs. Shaw. Mr. Crane. She didn't move from the porch. That's a lot of wagon for a man who was just looking around yesterday. Said I'd be back. You did. She still didn't move. People say things. I ain't people. He climbed down, boots crunching on the frozen ground. You want this food or not? 'Cause my horses are cold and my back ain't what it used to be. For a long moment, Margaret just looked at him. Then something shifted in her face. Not softness exactly, but the hard edge dulled just a little. Billy, Thomas, come and help unload. She stepped aside as 2 of the older boys rushed past her. Flour goes in the back pantry. Apples in the cellar where it's cool. Salt pork. I know where it goes, ma'am, Heck said, already lifting a sack over his shoulder. Been storing food since before you was born. Then you won't need my instruction. But there was something almost like a smile at the corner of her mouth. The children swarmed the wagon like ants on honey, small hands reaching for sacks and crates, passing them down a line into the building. Silas found himself standing in the middle of it, unsure what to do with his hands. Mr. Crane, he turned. Ruth Anne stood behind him, that same direct gaze, that same unsettling way of looking through him instead of at him. You came back, she said. Told you I would. Lots of people tell me things. She tilted her head. You're different, though. I can tell. That's so. She reached up and took a small sack of apples from the wagon. Had to stretch on her toes to reach it. He noticed her left hand then, 2 fingers missing, the stumps healed over smooth and pink. She caught him looking. Frostbite. First winter here. Don't feel sorry for me. Wasn't gonna. Good. She tucked the sack under her arm. 'Cause I don't need sorry. I need people who stay. She walked off toward the building before he could respond. Heck appeared at his elbow. That one's something else. Yeah. Silas watched her disappear inside. She is. By midday, the wagon was empty and Silas was still there. He hadn't planned to stay. Figured he'd drop the supplies and ride back to the ranch. Back to the silence, back to the empty chairs. But somehow, his hands found work. A shutter hanging crooked on its hinges, a board loose on the porch steps, a draft coming through a window that needed rags stuffed in the cracks. You don't have to do that, Mr. Crane. Margaret stood in the doorway, watching him nail the shutter back into place. I know. He drove another nail. Doing it anyway. Why? The hammer paused mid-swing. He didn't look at her. House this cold. Kids get sick. Kids get it sick. Some of them don't get better. Ain't complicated. That's not what I asked. He finished the nail, tested the shutter, swung it open, swung it closed. Solid now. Maybe I just want to be useful, Mrs. Shaw. That allowed? She didn't answer. Just watched him move to the next broken thing. The children watched too. They didn't know what to make of him, this tall, weathered man with the hard face and the soft hands. Thomas, the 7-year-old who'd asked about millionaires, followed him like a shadow. Mister, you really own 1,000 cows? 3,000. That's a lot of cows. It is. You ever name 'em? Silas paused, a board in his hands. Can't say I have. I'd name 'em, everyone. And Thomas scratched his nose. I'd call the first one Biscuit, 'cause I like biscuits. Something cracked in Silas's chest, small, like ice breaking on a pond in early spring. Biscuit's a good name. You think so? I do. On Thomas grinned, gap-toothed, wide, pure, and ran off to tell the others that the millionaire liked his cow name. Ruth Anne appeared then, holding 2 tin cups. Mrs. Shaw said to bring you coffee. It ain't good coffee, but it's hot. Silas took the cup. Thank you. You're welcome. She didn't leave. Just stood there, holding her own cup with her 3-fingered hand, watching him drink. You're staying a long time. Got a lot of broke things to fix. There's always broke things. You can't fix 'em all. Can try. She considered this, sipped her coffee, made a face at the bitterness. My mama used to say that. Can't fix everything, Ruthie, but you can try. And she fixed a lot of things before she died. She sounds like a good woman. She was. Ruth Ann looked down at her cup. She told me my daddy was a good man, too. Said he loved me but couldn't carry me. You ever hear something like that? The question hit Silas like a mule kick. He took a long drink of coffee to hide whatever showed on his face. Can't say I have. I think about it sometimes. What it means, couldn't carry me. She looked up at him. You think a person can love someone and still leave him? 20 years of silence pressed against the back of his throat. 20 years of a small wooden horse in his pocket. 20 years of an empty chair. I think, he said slowly, people do things they regret, things they can't take back, and they spend the rest of their lives wishing they could. Ruth Ann nodded, like this made sense to her. That's sad. It is. But it's honest. She finished her coffee, handed him the empty cup. I like honest better than nice. Nice don't mean nothing most of the time. And she walked away, leaving him standing there with 2 empty cups and a crack in his chest that was getting wider by the minute. Evening came early, the way it does in November. Silas sat in the orphanage kitchen, a 3rd cup of bad coffee in his hands, watching Margaret direct the dinner preparations like a general commanding troops. The soup tonight was thick, real potatoes, real carrots, chunks of salt pork floating in the broth. The children ate like they'd never seen food before. Ruth Ann sat across the long table from him, not eating yet, watching the younger ones get their fill first. You should eat, Silas said. Little ones first. That's the rule. Who made that rule? I did. She shrugged. Someone's gotta. Margaret sat down next to Silas, her own bowl untouched. She does that every meal, waits till the end. Sometimes there's nothing left. Then why let her? You try stopping her. Margaret picked up her spoon, stirred the soup without eating. She's been here 4 years, longest of any of them. The others, they come, they go. Families take them, or they run off, or, she stopped. Ruth Ann stays, takes care of the young ones like they're her own blood. She's 9 years old. She's been 9 years old going on 40 since the day she got here. Margaret finally took a bite, chewed slowly. Her mother died of fever. Walked 3 miles through snow to bring Ruth Ann here before she passed. Died on our doorstep. Silas set down his cup. The girl watched it happen, held her mother's hand till it went cold. Margaret's voice was flat, matter-of-fact. The way people talk about things, too painful, to dress up with emotion. First thing she said to me after wasn't help or why, when there was what can I do. Across the table, Ruth Ann was finally eating, spooning soup into her mouth with her 3-fingered hand, smiling at something one of the little ones said. Silas's hand went to his pocket. Margaret saw. Her eyes narrowed. There's something you're not telling me, Mr. Crane. There usually is. That's not an answer. I know. He stood up, leaving the coffee, leaving the warmth, walking out into the cold evening air where his breath could fog and freeze and disappear before anyone could read what was written in it. The snow had started falling, light, gentle, covering the ugly ground with something clean. Behind him, through the window, he could see Ruth Ann helping the little ones clear their bowls. She was laughing at something. The sound shouldn't have been able to reach him through the glass. It did anyway. Ruth Anne asked questions the way other children asked for food, like she'd starve without answers. And Silas Crane, who'd dodged the truth for 20 years, found he couldn't dodge a 9-year-old girl. 3 days turned into a week. A week turned into something Silas didn't have a name for. He told himself he was just checking on things, making sure the food held out, the firewood stayed stacked, the shutters didn't come loose again. Told himself any decent man would do the same. But decent men didn't ride 7 miles in the frozen dark just to watch children eat breakfast. Decent men didn't sit on orphanage porches past sundown, listening to the wind, waiting for a red-haired girl to come ask him questions he couldn't answer. The town had started to talk. He heard it from Heck, who heard it from the general store, who heard it from the blacksmith's wife. They're saying you've gone soft, boss. Heck was brushing down the horses in the orphanage stable, a converted shed that leaked in 3 places, saying the widow Shaw's got you under some kind of spell. People got nothing better to do than flap their gums. That's the truth of it. Heck hung the brush on its nail. But there's talk and there's talk. Some folks wondering why a man with all you got would spend his days fixing broke things in an orphanage. Let 'em wonder. I ain't the one wondering, boss. Heck pulled his coat tighter. I'm the one who's known you 30 years. I'm the one who knows what you carry in that pocket. Silas went still. Ain't never asked about it, Heck continued, not looking at him. Figured you'd tell me when you was ready, but I got eyes. I seen how you look at that little girl, like she's a ghost and a gift all wrapped up together. He finally met Silas's gaze. Whatever you're looking for here, I hope you find it. I surely do. He walked out of the stable, leaving Silas alone with the horses in the cold and 20 years of silence. Ruth Anne found him there an hour later. She had a way of appearing without sound, like she'd learned early that quiet kept you safe. You're still here, she said. Still here. She climbed onto a hay bale, legs dangling, watching him oil a harness that didn't really need oiling. Mrs. Shaw says you got the biggest ranch in the county. One of them. She says you got a house with more rooms than we got children. Something like that. How come you're here, then, instead of there? The question sat between them like a stone in still water. Silas kept working the oil into leather, kept his eyes on his hands. House gets quiet, he said finally. Man can only stand so much quiet. It's never quiet here. Ruth Anne pulled her knees up to her chest. Thomas talks in his sleep. Baby Ellen cries most nights. Mrs. Shaw snores. Don't tell her I said that. Wouldn't dream of it. I like the noise, though. Means I ain't alone. She rested her chin on her knees. You ever been alone, Mr. Crane? Real alone, I mean? Not just by yourself, but alone inside where no one can reach? Silas's hands stopped moving. I was alone like that after Mama died. Ruth Anne continued, her voice soft but steady. Felt like I was at the bottom of a well, and everyone else was up at the top, looking down, but no one could hear me holler. Took a long time to climb out. How'd you do it? Started taking care of the little ones. Figured if I couldn't fix myself, maybe I could fix something else. And after a while, she shrugged. Well, I'm still climbing, but I can see the light now. The harness slipped from Silas's hands. He didn't pick it up. You're too wise for 9 years old, you know that? Mama said that too. Ruth Anne smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. She said I was born old. Said God gave me extra soul to make up for the hard road ahead. Smart woman, your mama. The smartest. She was quiet for a moment, watching him. Then, can I ask you something, Mr. Crane? You've been asking me things all week. This one's different. He waited. Ruth Anne reached into her coat pocket and pulled out something small. The wooden horse. She must have found it in the stable. Must have seen where he'd set it down while working. Who was this for? The air went out of the stable. Silas stared at the wooden horse in Ruth Anne's palm. Paint faded, edges worn smooth. Small enough to fit in a child's hand. Made to fit in a child's hand. Where'd you find that? On the workbench. You left it there when you was fixing the bridle. She turned it over, careful, like she knew it was fragile, even though it wasn't. It's real pretty. You can tell someone put a lot of love into making it. Ruth Anne, was it for someone? She looked up at him, those eyes that saw too much. A little girl, maybe? It's got a girl's name carved on the bottom. Right here, see? M-A-R-Y. Silas's throat closed. Mary's a nice name, Ruth Anne said. I knew a Mary once. She got adopted by a family from Butte. She was real sweet. She held out the horse. Is Mary your daughter, Mr. Crane? The word hit him like a bullet. Daughter. 20 years he'd avoided that word. 20 years he'd swallowed it back down every time it tried to climb up his throat. She was. The words came out scraped raw. A long time ago. What happened to her? He should lie. Should take the horse and walk away and never come back. Should do what he'd done every time someone got too close to the truth. Build the wall higher. Dig the moat deeper. disappear behind the money, in the land, in the silence. But Ruth Anne was looking at him with eyes that had already seen too much pain to be fooled by easy lies, eyes that had watched her mother die on a doorstep, eyes that deserved better than another adult who wouldn't give her a straight answer. "I gave her away," Silas said. The words fell into the silence like stones into a well. "Her mama, my wife, Mary, she died having her, bled out before the doctor could get there, and He stopped. Started again. "Every time I looked at that baby, I saw Mary dying. Saw her face going white. Heard her last breath. I couldn't," his voice broke. He turned away, gripping the stable rail until his knuckles went white. A minister came through, week after the funeral. Him and his wife, on their way east. Good people, kind people. They couldn't have children of their own. Silas stared at the wall, seeing nothing. I told myself she'd have a better life. Told myself I was doing right by her, giving her to folks who could look at her without seeing death. But that wasn't true. I don't know what's true anymore. He let go of the rail, turned back to face Ruth Anne. I was scared. That's the truth of it. I was 28 years old and scared out of my mind, and I couldn't carry her. Just like... He stopped. Ruth Ann's face had gone pale. "Just like my daddy." "Ruth Anne, I didn't mean..." "Couldn't carry me." She was still holding the wooden horse, but her hands had started to tremble. "That's what Mama said. He couldn't carry me." That ain't... Is that what happens?" Her voice cracked, and for the first time she sounded like what she was, a 9-year-old girl who'd lost everything. "People have babies, and then just give them away? 'Cause it's too hard? 'Cause they're scared?" "Some people. Not all people. But some." She looked down at the horse. "Some people make beautiful things for their babies, and then just... leave. I've regretted it every day of my life. Does that help?" She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "Does regretting make it better?" "No." Silas knelt down, bringing himself to her level. "No, it don't. Nothing makes it better, nothing except..." "Except what?" He didn't have an answer. Didn't know if there was one? Ruth Anne wiped her face with her 3-fingered hand, sniffed, looked at the wooden horse for a long moment. Then she held it out to him. "You should keep this," she said. "Until you find her, until you can give it to her yourself." Silas took the horse. His hands were shaking worse than hers. "And Mr. Crane?" Ruth Anne stood up, straightening her patched dress with dignity that belied her years. "If you ever do find her, don't wait. Don't be scared. Just tell her you're sorry." She walked out of the stable, leaving him kneeling in the hay, holding a 20-year-old toy made for a daughter he'd thrown away. Outside, the wind had picked up. The sky was going dark. A storm was coming. The worst truths don't come from enemies. They come from the people who almost loved you and learned they couldn't. The blizzard hit Stillwater County like God's own fury. 3 days of white blindness, wind screaming off the mountains, snow piling in drifts that swallowed fences and buried roads. Silas stayed at the ranch. Couldn't risk the horses on roads he couldn't see. He stood at the window of his empty house, watching the storm erase the world, and thought about a red-haired girl 7 miles away. She knew now, knew what he was, what he'd done. He'd seen it in her face before she walked out of the stable. The way she looked at him different. Not hate, exactly. Something worse, recognition. She'd looked at him and seen her own father, the ghost who couldn't carry her. And Silas didn't know if that made them closer or ruined everything. Heck, brought coffee on the second morning. Didn't say much. Didn't have to. "Storm's breaking tonight," he said. "Be clear by dawn." "I know. You going back out there?" Silas didn't answer. "She's a tough little thing," Heck continued. "Whatever you told her, whatever she knows now, she ain't the kind to break easy." "Maybe I am." Heck set down the coffee pot. "Boss, I've been with you through 2 droughts, a range war, and that mess with the railroad men. I seen you stare down armed rustlers without blinking. You ain't breakable. You're just bent." He headed for the door. "Bent things can straighten, broke things can't. Remember that." The storm died that night, leaving behind a world scrubbed white and silent. Silas saddled his horse before the sun cleared the mountains. The orphanage looked smaller somehow, huddled against the snow like a wounded animal. Smoke rose from the chimney. Good smoke, thick and steady. The firewood had held. Silas tied his horse and walked to the door. His hand hesitated over the wood. 3 days ago, he'd told a 9-year-old girl the worst thing he'd ever done. 3 days of blizzard silence, to wonder if she'd ever look at him the same. The door opened before he could knock. Margaret Shaw stood in the frame. Her face was stone. "Mr. Crane." No warmth, no welcome. "I wondered if you'd come back." "Storm kept me." "Did it?" Not a question. She stepped aside, but barely, making him squeeze past her into the hall. "Ruth Anne told me. About your daughter, about what you did. Silas stopped. The warmth of the building suddenly felt like a trap. She told me everything, Margaret continued. How you gave away your own child because you couldn't bear to look at her. How you've been carrying around a toy for 20 years like that makes up for abandoning an infant. Her voice was quiet, controlled, and all the more cutting for it. I knew there was something you weren't telling me. I didn't expect it to be that. Mrs. Shaw, I let you into this house. I let you near these children. Children who've already been abandoned once, children who are just starting to trust you. She stepped closer, and Silas saw the fury banked behind her eyes. Do you have any idea what you've done? I told her the truth. You told her that fathers leave. That's what you told her. You confirmed every fear that child has carried since she was 5 years old. Margaret's hands were shaking. She's barely eaten in 3 days, barely spoken. She sits by the window and watches the road like she's waiting for someone who's never going to come. And now she's waiting for you to leave too, because that's what fathers do, isn't it? That's what you taught her. The words hit Silas like physical blows. He took a step back. I didn't mean... What did you mean, Mr. Crane? Margaret advanced on him. Did you think you could come here, play savior, tell that child your tragic story, and then ride off into the sunset feeling better about yourself? Did you think she was here to heal you? No. Then what? What are you doing here? I don't know. The words tore out of him, echoing in the narrow hall. I don't know, all right? I saw her standing there in that doorway the first day, looking at me like she could see every rotten thing I ever did, and I couldn't walk away. I tried. I got on my horse and I tried to ride home, and I couldn't do it. That's not an answer. It's the only one I got. They stood there, squared off in the dim hallway, breath visible in the cold air that seeped through the walls. Somewhere deeper in the building, children's voices murmured. Normal sounds, safe sounds. Everything Silas had tried to build here, crumbling. I got a letter, Margaret said finally. Week before you showed up. From a church in Denver, Reverend Aldrich. He ministers to families passing through, been doing it 40 years. She reached into her apron, pulled out a folded paper. He wrote to every orphanage in the territory, looking for a woman named Mary Crane, or whatever name she might go by now. Silas went cold. He baptized her as an infant, Margaret continued. November 1867. The family that took her, the minister and his wife, they died of cholera in 71. The girl was passed to relatives. Lost track of her after that. She held out the letter. He's been trying to find her for years. Said her real father might still be alive, might be looking for her. Silas couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I wrote back this morning, before the storm cleared. Margaret's eyes were hard. Told him I might know who the father is. Told him if he has any information about the girl, where she went, what happened to her, he should send it to me, not to you. Why? Because I don't trust you, Mr. Crane. I don't trust that you won't run the moment things get hard. I don't trust that you won't break that child's heart even worse than it's already broken. And she folded her arms. And because Ruth Anne is mine to protect, not yours, you lost that right 20 years ago. The words should have made him angry, should have made him argue, defend himself, explain, but all Silas felt was the cold spreading through his chest, freezing everything it touched. Can I see her? No. Mrs. Shaw, she doesn't want to see you. Margaret softened, just slightly. She told me this morning, said she needs time to think. Said she's not sure if she can look at you right now without seeing her own daddy's face. Silas closed his eyes. I told her that wasn't fair, Margaret continued. Told her you're not the man who left her. But she's 9 years old, Mr. Crane. She doesn't know how to separate the two. All she knows is that fathers leave. And you proved her right. I haven't left. Not yet. Margaret moved aside, gesturing toward the door. But you will. They always do. The ones who come with wagons and promises, the ones who fix shutters and bring firewood, they stay until it's hard, and then they're gone. I've seen it 100 times. Silas walked to the door, stopped with his hand on the frame. I'm not going anywhere, Mrs. Shaw. Words. Then watch me. He stepped out into the cold. The sun was climbing now, light glaring off the snow, and as he reached his horse he looked up at the orphanage windows. Ruth Anne stood in one of them. 3rd floor, corner room. Her face was pale behind the glass, her breath fogging the pain. She wasn't smiling, wasn't waving, just watching. Silas raised one hand, not a wave, just an acknowledgement. I see you, I'm here. Ruth Anne lifted her 3-fingered hand, pressed it flat against the glass. Then she turned away, and the window was empty. Heck was waiting at the end of the road, horses stamping in the cold. How'd it go? Silas mounted up. His chest felt like someone had reached in and rearranged everything, leaving nothing where it belonged. She won't see me. The girl? Both of them. He gathered the reins. Mrs. Shaw's got a letter. From a minister in Denver, someone who might know what happened to Mary. Heck went quiet. She's not going to tell me what's in it. Not until she trusts me. Silas looked back at the orphanage one more time. The window was still empty. And Ruth Anne thinks I'm just like her daddy, the one who couldn't carry her. Are you? The question hung in the frozen air. I don't know, Silas said, but I'm about to find out. He turned his horse toward home. Behind him, the orphanage sat in the snow like a wound that wouldn't close, full of children waiting for someone to stay, and one red-haired girl who'd stopped believing anyone would. The sky was clear, the storm was over. But Silas knew the real storm was just beginning. Some men lose their families to war or sickness. Silas Crane lost his to fear, and fear, unlike death, never stops collecting its debt. A week passed, then two. Silas came to the orphanage every day, brought supplies, fixed things that broke, chopped wood until his shoulders screamed and his hands bled through his gloves. Margaret let him work, but wouldn't let him inside. He was a hired man now, nothing more. Useful for his labor, tolerated for his money, trusted with nothing that mattered. Ruth Anne stayed invisible. Sometimes he caught a glimpse of red hair in a window, a shadow moving behind frosted glass, but she never came out, never waved. The hand pressed against the window that first day had been the last time she'd acknowledged him at all. She's punishing you, Heck said one evening, watching Silas stack firewood in the dark. Or maybe she's punishing herself. Hard to tell with young ones. She's got every right. Didn't say she didn't, just saying it can't go on forever. Either she forgives you, or she don't. But this in between, Heck shook his head. It'll kill you both. Silas drove the axe into the chopping block, left it there. What am I supposed to do? She won't see me. Mrs. Shaw won't let me near her. I can't force a child to forgive me. No, but you can show her you ain't going nowhere. Heck pulled out his tobacco pouch, started rolling a cigarette. That's what she's waiting for, you know. She's testing you, seeing how long before you give up and ride off like everyone else. I'm not giving up. Then don't. Heck lit the cigarette, smoke curling in the cold air. But don't expect it to be easy either. Trust is like a horse with a broke leg. Sometimes it heals. Sometimes you gotta shoot it and start over with a new one. That's a hell of a metaphor. I'm a hell of a man. Heck almost smiled. Go home, boss. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's another day of proving yourself. Silas went home, but he didn't sleep. He sat in his empty dining room, 8 chairs around a table built for a family that never existed, and he stared at the wooden horse in his hands, Mary, his daughter. Somewhere out there, alive. From dead, happy or suffering, and he'd never know because he'd been too much of a coward to look. The letter. Margaret had the letter. Information from Denver, from a minister who'd been searching for years. She dangled it in front of him like a carrot before a starving mule, then snatched it away. He could demand it, could threaten to cut off the supplies, the money, the firewood, could use his wealth like a weapon, the way men like him always did. But that would prove Margaret right. That would prove Ruth Anne right. That would make him exactly the man they thought he was. Someone who only helped when it cost him nothing, who ran the moment things got hard. He set the wooden horse on the table, looked at it there, small and alone, surrounded by empty chairs. I'm sorry, he whispered to no one. I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough. The fire crackled, the wind moaned outside, and Silas Crane sat in the dark with his guilt, waiting for a dawn that felt like it would never come. It came anyway. Dawn always does. December 23rd, 2 days before Christmas. Silas rode to the orphanage through fresh snow, breath fogging, sky the color of old bone. He'd brought gifts this time, nothing fancy, just practical things. New mittens for the children, knitted by the women at the church in town. A bolt of warm flannel for making clothes. A sack of peppermint sticks because even orphans deserve something sweet at Christmas. Margaret met him out of the door. Her face was different today. Not softer exactly, but less hard. Something had shifted. Mr. Crane. She stepped aside. Come in. He blinked. Ma'am? I said come in. Before you freeze to death on my porch. And I have to explain to the sheriff why there's a dead millionaire in my yard. Silas entered. The warmth of the building wrapped around him like a blanket, and he realized how cold he'd been, not just today, but for weeks, for years, for his whole damn life. Ruth Anne wants to see you, Margaret said. His heart stopped. She does? Don't make me repeat myself. Margaret was already walking down the hall. She's in the kitchen, helping with the Christmas bread. I told her you were coming. She paused at the kitchen door, turned back. I also told her about the letter. What? The letter from Denver. I read it to her last night. Margaret's eyes were unreadable. She deserved to know, and frankly, so do you, but I wanted her to hear it first. What does it say? Margaret didn't answer, just pushed open the kitchen door. Ruth Anne stood at the long wooden table, flour on her hands, dough in front of her. She looked up when Silas entered. Her face was pale, eyes red-rimmed, but she wasn't crying. She looked like she'd cried herself out days ago and had nothing left. "Mr. Crane," she said. Just that. His name. Ruth Anne. Margaret slipped out, closing the door behind her. The kitchen was warm, smelling of yeast and wood smoke, and for a moment neither of them spoke. "Mrs. Shaw told me about the letter," Ruth Anne said finally. "About your daughter, about what happened to her." Silas couldn't breathe. "What did it say?" Ruth Anne looked down at the dough. Her three-fingered hand pressed into it, leaving a mark. "The minister who took her, Reverend Aldrich, he and his wife died when she was 4, cholera. Your daughter got passed to his wife's sister in Kansas City." She paused. "They weren't kind people, Mr. Crane," the letter said. It said she ran away when she was 12, disappeared. "Nobody knows where she went." The words hit Silas like a physical blow. He grabbed the edge of the table to keep from falling. Reverend Aldrich, the one who wrote the letter, he's been looking for her ever since. Feels responsible, I guess. Guilty. Ruth Anne finally looked up at him. He spent 15 years trying to find a girl he only knew for 4, because he baptized her, because he made a promise to God to watch over her. Silas's legs gave out. He sank onto a kitchen stool, head in his hands. "She's alive," he whispered. "Or she was. 12 years old and she ran away and nobody knows what happened after that." Ruth Ann's voice was quiet but steady. "She could be anywhere. Could be dead. Could be married with children of her own. Could be living on the streets somewhere. Or in another orphanage. Or—" "Stop." Silas's voice cracked. "Please." Ruth Anne walked around the table, stood in front of him. Her flour-dusted hands hung at her sides, and she looked at him the way she had that first day, straight through, seeing everything. "I was angry at you," she said, "when you told me about her, about giving her away. I thought you were just like my daddy. Someone who made a baby and then threw her away like she didn't matter. Ruth Anne, let me finish." She took a breath. "I spent 3 days hating you, hating my daddy, hating every man who ever left a child behind. And then Mrs. Shaw read me that letter, and I realized something." She knelt down so she was eye level with him. 9 years old, flower on her cheek, eyes ancient with understanding. "You didn't throw her away because she didn't matter. You threw her away because she mattered too much. Because every time you looked at her, you saw the woman you loved dying. And you couldn't carry that. You just couldn't." Tears spilled down Silas's face. He didn't try to stop them. "That don't make it right," Ruth Anne continued. "What you did, it hurt her. It hurt her bad. She grew up without a daddy, got passed to mean people, ran away into God knows what. That's on you, Mr. Crane. That's going to be on you forever. I know. But," she reached out and took his hand, her three-fingered grip surprisingly strong. "But you didn't stop loving her. You carried that little horse around for 20 years. You built a whole life that was empty because she wasn't in it. You punished yourself every single day." She squeezed his hand. "That don't make it right, but it makes it real. It makes you human." Silas broke. 20 years of silence, 20 years of frozen grief, 20 years of carrying a wooden horse and eating alone at a table built for 8. It all came pouring out of him in great heaving sobs that shook his whole body. He wept like he hadn't wept since the night Mary died in his arms. Since the morning he handed his daughter to strangers and watched them ride away. Ruth Anne didn't let go of his hand. She held on through all of it, this tiny girl with her missing fingers and her 2 old eyes, anchoring him to the world when everything else was falling apart. When the sobs finally quieted, she spoke again. "I forgive you, Mr. Crane." He looked at her through blurred eyes. "What?" "I forgive you. Not for her, that ain't mine to give, but for me." She smiled, small and sad. "I was so scared you were going to leave, like my daddy, like everyone. But you didn't. You came back every day, even when I wouldn't see you. Even when Mrs. Shaw treated you like dirt, you just kept coming. I couldn't stay away. I know." "Eo," she stood up, still holding his hand. "And that's how I know you're different. My daddy, whoever he was, he never came back. Not once. But you did, over and over. And that matters, Mr. Crane. That matters more than you know." Silas wiped his face with his free hand, took a shaky breath. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." "Probably not," Ruth Anne shrugged. "But I'm giving it anyway. Mama always said forgiveness ain't about deserving. It's about letting go of the rock so you don't drown." She released his hand, walked back to the bread dough, started kneading again, like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't just reached into his chest and rearranged everything inside. "Crane." "Yeah?" "I think you should keep looking for her. You're Mary. Ruth Anne pressed the dough flat, folded it over, pressed again. 15 years is a long time, but it ain't forever. And if that minister can keep looking after all this time, so can you. What if I find her and she hates me? Then at least you'll know. Ruth Anne looked up at him. And at least she'll know you tried. That's more than most people get. The kitchen door opened. Margaret stood there, watching them both. Everything all right in here? Ruth Anne smiled, the first real smile Silas had seen from her in weeks. Yes, ma'am. Mr. Crane and I were just talking about Christmas bread. Margaret looked at Silas's tear-streaked face, at Ruth Anne's flour-covered hands, at the space between them that had somehow become smaller. Christmas bread, she repeated. Right, but there was something in her eyes that might have been approval. Well, when you're done talking about bread, there's firewood that needs stacking. Yes, ma'am. Silas stood up. His legs were shaky, but they held. I'll get right on that. He walked past Margaret, paused at the door. Mrs. Shaw, the letter. Would you let me read it? All of it? Margaret studied him for a long moment. Then she reached into her apron and pulled out the folded paper. Don't make me regret this. Silas took the letter, held it like it was made of glass. Thank you. He walked out into the cold, the letter burning in his pocket like a coal. And for the first time in 20 years, he felt something other than guilt. He felt hope. Chapter 7, Solitude, Moral Silence. The deepest prayers aren't words. They're the silence after you run out of ways to lie to yourself. Silas didn't go home that night. He rode out past the ranch, past the property lines, past the fence posts that marked the edge of everything he owned. The moon was high and full, turning the snow to silver, and his horse picked its way through the drifts without guidance. Just moving. Just going somewhere that wasn't the empty house with the empty chairs. The letter sat in his pocket like a live coal. He hadn't read it yet, not all of it. Couldn't bring himself to unfold it fully, to see the words that would make Mary's suffering real in black ink on paper. He stopped at the old creek bed, frozen solid now, where he'd proposed to Mary 21 years ago. Summer then, wildflowers everywhere. She'd laughed when he dropped the ring in the tall grass. And they'd spent an hour on their knees looking for it, and when she finally found it, she'd put it on herself because his hands were shaking too hard. You're a mess, Silas Crane, she'd said. Good thing I love messes. He dismounted, stood at the edge of the frozen water. I made a mess of everything, he said to the empty air. You'd be ashamed of me, Mary. You'd look at what I did to our girl, and you'd never forgive me. The wind answered, nothing else. Silas pulled out the letter, unfolded it slowly, carefully, like it might crumble in his hands. The moonlight was bright enough to read by, and he forced his eyes to move across the words. Dear Mrs. Shaw, I write to you in hopes that you might assist in a matter that has weighed upon my conscience for many years. In November of 1867, I baptized an infant girl named Mary Crane, daughter of Silas and Mary Crane of Stillwater, Montana Territory. The child was given into the care of Reverend Thomas Whitmore and his wife Clara, who were traveling east to minister in Ohio. Reverend Whitmore and Clara perished of cholera in the spring of 1871. The child, then 4 years of age, was placed with Clara's sister, Mrs. Edna Fowler, and her husband in Kansas City. I regret to say that the Fowlers were not kind guardians. Reports reached me of neglect and harsh treatment, but by the time I was able to investigate, the girl had fled. She was 12 years old when she ran away. That was 15 years ago. I have searched for her ever since, following rumors and half-leads across 6 states. I have found nothing certain, only whispers. A girl matching her description was seen in St. Louis in 1879. Another sighting in Denver in 1882, then nothing. If her father still lives, he deserves to know what became of his daughter. And if by some miracle she is found, she deserves to know that someone has been looking for her all this time. I remain, in faith and hope, Reverend James Aldrich, First Methodist Church. Denver Silas read it twice, 3 times. Let the words sink into the frozen places inside him. 12 years old. She'd been 12 when she ran away from people who hurt her. 12 years old and alone in the world because her father had been too broken to keep her. He sank to his knees in the snow. Didn't feel the cold. I'm sorry. The words came out cracked, barely a whisper. God, Mary, I'm so sorry. I thought I was giving her a better life. I thought she'd be safe. I thought she'd be loved. And the moon hung overhead, indifferent. The stars burned in the black sky like accusations. I stopped looking, Silas continued, talking to his dead wife, to his lost daughter, to the God he'd stopped believing in 20 years ago. I got scared she was dead, scared she was alive, and hated me. So I stopped, built my ranch, made my money, told myself it was too late, told myself there was no point, told myself she was better off not knowing the coward who threw her away. He pressed his hands into the snow, feeling the burn of it. But that was a lie, all of it. I didn't stop because it was hopeless. I stopped because I was weak, because it was easier to carry the guilt than to face what I'd done. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. The sound hung in the air, lonely and wild. Ruth Anne forgave me today. Silas laughed, but there was no humor in it. 9 years old, lost her mama, never knew her daddy, missing 2 fingers to frostbite. And she forgave me, just like that. Said I wasn't like her father because I kept coming back. He looked up at the sky, at the stars his wife used to name for him, back when they'd lie in the grass and dream about the future. But am I? Am I different? Or am I just the same man in different clothes? A coward who runs when things get hard? The silence answered him. The terrible, holy silence of a winter night, when the world holds its breath and waits for you to decide who you're gonna be. Silas stayed on his knees until he couldn't feel them anymore. Then he stayed longer. Heck found him at dawn. The old foreman had tracked him from the ranch, following hoofprints in the snow, and when he came upon Silas still kneeling at the frozen creek bed, he didn't say a word, just dismounted, walked over, stood there. You trying to freeze to death? Maybe. Ain't gonna help nobody. Not your girl, not Ruth Anne. Not yourself. Heck pulled off his coat and dropped it around Silas's shoulders. Get up, you're turning blue. I can't feel my legs. I figured. Heck grabbed him under the arms, hauled him upright. Lean on me. We'll get you to the horse. And they stumbled together through the snow, Silas's frozen legs screaming back to life with every step. Heck half-carried him to the buckskin mare, boosted him into the saddle. You read the letter, Heck said. Not a question. Yeah. Bad? She ran away, 12 years old, been missing ever since. Heck was quiet for a long moment. Then, you gonna look for her? Silas stared at the horizon, where the sun was just beginning to turn the sky pink. I spent 20 years not looking. 20 years hiding behind money and land and silence. 20 years letting fear make my choices for me. He turned to Heck. Ruth Anne asked me if I was going to leave. Like everyone else. I told her I wasn't. Told her I was done running. Were you lying? I don't know. Gillis looked down at his hands. Blue with cold, shaking. The same hands that had let go of his daughter 20 years ago. But I know one thing. If I give up now, if I stop looking again, then Ruth Anne was wrong about me. Then I am just like her daddy. A man who couldn't carry the weight. So what are you going to do? The sun broke over the mountains, flooding the valley with golden light. The snow glittered like diamonds, like promises, like second chances nobody deserved, but some people got anyway. I'm going to write to Reverend Aldrich. Tell him I'm her father. Tell him I want to help search. Silas gathered the reins. And I'm going to give Ruth Anne the Christmas she deserves. Not because it'll make up for anything. Not because she needs my charity, but because he stopped, tried to find the words, because she's the one who showed me I could still be a father. Even now, even after everything. He looked at Heck. She's not Mary, I know that, but maybe being a father isn't about blood. Maybe it's about showing up, over and over, no matter what. Heck nodded slowly. Your wife would have liked that girl. Yeah. Silas smiled, small and sad. She would have. They rode back toward the ranch as the sun climbed higher, 2 old men on tired horses, shadows stretching long across the snow. And somewhere behind them, at the frozen creek where Silas had proposed to his wife 21 years ago, the wind swept away the marks where he'd knelt, erasing the evidence of a man's long-delayed reckoning with himself, leaving only clean white snow and the promise of a new day. Silas Crane had spent 20 years building walls. It took one 9-year-old girl 3 weeks to show him the door. Christmas Eve morning broke cold and clear, the kind of day that makes a man believe in second chances, even when he doesn't deserve them. Silas was up before dawn, hadn't slept much, couldn't sleep, not with everything churning inside him. He'd spent half the night at his desk, writing and rewriting a letter to Reverend Aldrich in Denver. The final version sat on the table now, sealed and stamped, waiting to go out with the morning post. Reverend Aldrich, my name is Silas Crane. I am the father of the girl you have been searching for. I gave her away in November of 1867, and I've regretted it every day since. I stopped looking for her 10 years ago because I was afraid. Afraid she was dead, afraid she hated me, afraid to face what my cowardice had cost her. I am no longer afraid. Or rather, I am still afraid. But I am done letting fear make my choices. I want to help you search. I have money and resources. I have time. I have a lifetime of debt to pay. Please write to me at the address below and tell me what you know, what you've tried, where you've looked. I will not rest until I find her or until I know for certain that she cannot be found. If she is alive, I want her to know that her father never stopped loving her, that he carried a wooden horse in his pocket for 20 years, waiting to give it to her, that he is sorry, more sorry than words can hold. And if she is dead, I want to find her grave. I want to kneel there and beg her forgiveness. I want to tell her that she deserved better, that her mother would have been ashamed of me, that I am ashamed of myself. Whatever you need from me, it is yours. Silas Crane. He'd read it a dozen times. Changed words, put them back, changed them again. It wasn't enough. No letter could be enough, but it was a start, a first step after 20 years of standing still. Heck knocked on the door at 7, stomping snow off his boots. "Mornin', boss. You look like hell." Feel like it too. Silas handed him the letter. "This goes to Denver, today, whatever it costs." Heck looked at the address, nodded. "Consider it done." He tucked the letter inside his coat. "What about the orphanage?" "That's where I'm headed. Got something I need to do." "On Christmas Eve?" "Especially on Christmas Eve." Silas pulled on his coat, his hat, his gloves. "Tell the boys to load up the big wagon. Everything we talked about last night. And Heck..." "Yeah?" "Thank you for finding me at the creek, for not letting me freeze." Heck's weathered face softened. 30 years I've been pulling you out of messes, boss. Ain't about to stop now." He paused at the door. "Whatever you're about to do, I hope it works." "Me too." The ride to Stillwater took longer than usual. Silas had the big wagon this time, loaded down with more than just supplies. Blankets and food, yes, but also something else. Something he'd been planning since the night at the creek. The orphanage looked different in the Christmas Eve light. Someone had hung a wreath on the door, crooked, made of pine branches and red ribbon, clearly the work of small hands. Smoke rose thick and steady from the chimney. Through the windows, Silas could see movement, could hear the faint sound of children's voices raised in song. He tied the horses and walked to the door, knocked. Margaret opened it. Her face was guarded but not hostile, not like before. Something had changed since she'd given him the letter. "Mr. Crane, Merry Christmas Eve." "Mrs. Shaw, mind if I come in?" She stepped aside. "The children are practicing carols. Ruth Anne's teaching the little ones Silent Night. She's..." Margaret paused. "She's been different since you two talked, lighter, like something heavy got lifted off her." "She lifted something off me too." Margaret nodded slowly. "I noticed." She led him down the hall toward the kitchen. "I owe you an apology, Mr. Crane. I judged you hard when I found out about your daughter. Thought you were just another rich man trying to buy his way into heaven." "Maybe I was, at first. Maybe." When she stopped walking, turned to face him. "But a man who's just buying forgiveness doesn't kneel in the snow all night, doesn't come back day after day when no one will let him through the door, doesn't look at a child like Ruth Anne the way you look at her." "How do I look at her?" "Like she's the answer to a question you've been asking for 20 years. Margaret's eyes were bright. "I don't know if you'll ever find your Mary. I hope you do. But I want you to know, whatever happens, you've been good for Ruth Anne. You've shown her that not all fathers leave." Silas's throat tightened. "That means more than you know." "I expect it does." Margaret resumed walking. "Now come on, she'll want to see you." Ruth Anne was in the main room, surrounded by children. She stood on a wooden crate so the little ones could see her, conducting with her 3-fingered hand, leading them through Silent Night with the patience of someone twice her age. Sleep in heavenly peace. The children's voices were thin but earnest, and Ruth Ann smiled as they hit the final note. A real smile, not the guarded one Silas had seen before. When she looked up and saw him standing in the doorway, the smile didn't fade. It grew. "Mr. Crane!" She hopped off the crate. "You came." "Said I would." "I know, but it's Christmas Eve. Figured you might have fancy millionaire things to do." "Nothing fancy about me." Silas knelt down, bringing himself to her level. "Can I talk to you? Private-like?" Ruth Ann glanced at Margaret, who nodded. "Go on. I'll finish with the little ones." They walked out to the porch, where the cold air bit at their faces and the snow sparkled in the late morning sun. Ruth Ann pulled her thin coat tighter, and Silas made a mental note. New coat, first thing after Christmas. "What did you want to talk about?" Silas took a breath, reached into his pocket, pulled out the wooden horse. "I made this 20 years ago. For a daughter I was too scared to keep. I told myself I'd give it to her someday. When I found her." He turned it over in his hands. "I don't know if I ever will find her. I hope so. I'm going to try. But even if I do..." He looked at Ruth Ann, at her red hair, in her 2 old eyes, in her 3-fingered hand that had held his while he wept. "Even if I do find her, this horse wasn't just meant for her. It was meant for the daughter I was supposed to be, the father I should have become." He held it out. "I'd like you to have it." Ruth Ann stared at the horse, didn't take it. Crane, I can't... I'm not finished." Silas swallowed hard. "Yesterday I went to Judge Morrison's office. Filed some papers, legal papers. His voice shook. I want to adopt you, Ruth Anne. I want to give you my name, my home, everything I should have given Mary. The words hung in the frozen air. I'm not asking you to replace her. I'm not asking you to forget your mama or stop wondering about your real daddy. I'm just asking, his voice broke. I'm asking if you'll let me be your father, if you'll let me try. Ruth Ann's face crumpled. Tears spilled down her cheeks, catching the light. You mean it? You're not just saying it? I mean it more than I've ever meant anything. Silas's own eyes were wet. I'm done running, Ruth Anne. I'm done being scared. I want to be the father who stays. She threw herself into his arms. He caught her, held her, felt her small body shake with sobs against his chest. His hand cradled the back of her head, and he realized he was crying too, both of them weeping on the orphanage porch while the snow fell and the children sang inside and the whole world held its breath. Yes, Ruth Anne whispered into his coat. Yes, I'll let you be my pa. Silas closed his eyes, held her tighter. Thank you, he breathed. Thank you for giving me another chance. Ruth Anne pulled back, wiping her face with her three-fingered hand. She looked at the wooden horse, still in Silas's grip. Is that really for me? It was always for you. He pressed it into her palm. I just didn't know it yet. She held it up, examining it in the light. The faded paint, the worn edges, 20 years of grief and hope and waiting, small enough to fit in a child's hand. It's beautiful, she said. So are you. Silas stood up, offering his hand. Come on, let's go tell Mrs. Shaw. And then, if you want, I'd like to take you home. Ruth Anne took his hand, squeezed it. I'd like that too, Pa. The word hit him like sunlight after a lifetime of dark. Pa. He'd waited 20 years to hear it, and it was worth every single day. The dinner bell rang at Stillwater Mission for the first time in a year. This time, there was food on the table. And for the first time in 20 years, Silas Crane wasn't eating alone. Christmas Day, the house that had held nothing but silence for 2 decades now held laughter. Children's voices echoed off walls that had forgotten what joy sounded like. Small feet pounded up and down the stairs. Somewhere in the kitchen, pots clanged and Margaret Shaw's voice rose above the chaos, directing traffic like a general commanding the happiest army in Montana. Silas stood in the doorway of the dining room, watching. 24 people sat at the table he'd built for 8. Extra chairs borrowed from the church, from the general store, from neighbors who'd heard what the Millionaire rancher was doing and wanted to help. The children from Stillwater Mission, all 23 of them, crowded together on benches, elbows bumping, faces bright. Hex sat at the far end, showing Thomas how to arm wrestle. Margaret presided over the head nearest the kitchen, making sure plates stayed full. And Ruth Anne sat at Silas's right hand, the place where Mary should have sat, the place that had been empty for 20 years. The wooden horse stood on the table beside her plate, guarding her food like a tiny sentinel. Pa! Ruth Anne tugged his sleeve. You gonna stand there all day, or you gonna sit down and eat? Pa. The words still hit him like light through a window. He didn't think he'd ever get used to it. Didn't think he wanted to. Just looking, he said, taking it in. Taking what in? This. He gestured at the room. The noise, the warmth, the chaos of 24 people sharing a meal. Ain't never had a Christmas like this. Ain't never had a... He stopped, swallowed. A family. Ruth Ann's hand found his, squeezed. You got one now. He sat down. Margaret called for quiet. The children settled, more or less, elbows still bumping, but voices dropping to whispers. She looked around this table, at the faces young and old, at the food piled high, at the man who'd made it all possible, sitting with tears in his eyes, and a 9-year-old girl holding a hand. Mr. Crane. Margaret's voice was formal, but her eyes were soft. Would you say grace? Silas froze. He hadn't prayed in 20 years, hadn't spoken to God since the night Mary died, had spent 2 decades building walls between himself and anything holy because he couldn't bear to ask forgiveness from a God who'd taken everything. But Ruth Anne was looking at him. The children were looking at him, and somewhere maybe his wife was looking too. He bowed his head. Lord. The word came out rough, rusty from disuse. I ain't talked to you in a long time. Figured you didn't want to hear from a man like me. Figured I didn't deserve to ask for anything. The room was silent. Even the smallest children had gone still. But I'm asking now, not for me, for them. He looked up at the faces around the table. The orphans who'd lost everything, the woman who'd given her life to caring for them, the old foreman who'd pulled him out of more messes than he could count. Thank you for this food. Thank you for this family. Thank you for... His voice broke. Thank you for second chances. For people who forgive us even when we don't deserve it. For children who teach old men how to be human again. Ruth Ann's hand tightened on his. And thank you for my daughter, both of them. Silas closed his eyes. Wherever Mary is, Lord, keep her safe. Help me find her. And if she's somewhere I can't reach, tell her I'm sorry. Tell her I never stopped loving her. Tell her that her father finally learned how to stay. He opened his eyes, wiped his face. Amen. Amen, the room echoed. Some voices strong, some trembling, some barely a whisper. Then Thomas broke the silence. Can we eat now? I'm starving. Laughter erupted. The spell broke, but gently, like ice melting in spring. Plates were passed, food was served, and the room filled with the sounds of forks and chatter and joy. Ruth Anne leaned close to Silas. That was a good prayer, Pa. First one in 20 years. Then it was extra good. She picked up the wooden horse, turned it over in her hands. I've been thinking about what you said, about your Mary, about how you're going to keep looking. I am. Already wrote to the Reverend in Denver. I know. Ruth Anne set the horse down carefully. I want to help. When I'm older, I want to help you find her. You don't have to do that. I know I don't have to. And she looked at him with those two old eyes. Those eyes that had seen too much pain and too much loss and had somehow kept believing anyway. But she's my sister now, ain't she? If you're my pa, then she's my sister. And sisters look out for each other. Silas couldn't speak, could only nod. Besides, Ruth Anne continued, a small smile playing at her lips, I figure if I can teach Thomas to sing Silent Night without going flat, I can do just about anything. The laugh that came out of Silas surprised him. It was rusty, unpracticed, but real. He hadn't laughed like that in he couldn't remember how long. I believe you can, Ruth Anne. I truly do. The meal went on, stories were told. Heck recounted the time Silas's horse threw him into a river, and he came up with a fish in his hat. Margaret talked about her late husband, about the dreams they'd had, about how the orphanage had become her way of keeping those dreams alive. The children interrupted with questions and jokes, and the endless, beautiful noise of young lives being lived, and Silas sat in the middle of it, surrounded by warmth, surrounded by family. The empty chair beside him finally filled. Later, after the meal, after the dishes were cleared and the children were dozing by the fire, Ruth Anne found Silas on the porch. He was looking out at the snow, at the stars coming out one by one, at the world that suddenly seemed bigger and brighter than it had in 20 years. What you thinking about? Lots of things. He made room for her on the bench. She sat, pulling her new coat tight, the coat he'd bought her, the first of many things he planned to give her, thinking about how different this Christmas is from last year. What did you do last Christmas? Ate alone, went to bed early. Tried not to think about, he stopped. Tried not to think. Ruth Anne nodded. I remember last Christmas too. Potato soup, Mrs. Shaw tried to make it special, put some herbs in it, but she shrugged. It was still just soup, and we were still just orphans. You're not orphans anymore. No. She smiled up at him. I guess we're not. They sat in silence for a while, watching the stars multiply. The cold was sharp but clean, and neither of them moved to go inside. Pa? Yeah? Why'd you come that first day? To the orphanage, I mean. Before you knew me. Before any of this. Silas thought about it. Thought about the empty table, the 8 chairs, the wagon full of food that was supposed to ease his conscience. I told myself I was being charitable, doing my Christian duty, helping folks less fortunate. He shook his head, but that was a lie. Same lie I'd been telling myself for 20 years. What's the truth? He looked at her red hair, and her 3-fingered hand, and her eyes that saw everything. I didn't come to feed the hungry, Ruth Anne. I came because I was starving. She considered this, nodded slowly. Well, she leaned against his arm, small and warm and solid. You ain't starving no more. No. He put his arm around her, pulled her close. No, I ain't. Inside, someone, Thomas probably, started singing Silent Night again, off-key and joyful. Other voices joined in. The sound drifted through the windows, mixing with the cold air and the starlight. Ruth Anne looked up at him. Merry Christmas, Pa. And then Silas Crane, the richest man in Stillwater County, the loneliest man in Montana, the father who'd finally learned how to stay, looked down at his daughter and smiled. Merry Christmas, sweetheart. The stars burned overhead. The snow lay silent and clean. And in a house built for a family that never came, a family had finally arrived. The lamp in the window burned bright,